future writers and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of my time is spent within.
GPS signal lost.
A lot of my time is spent getting lost.
We're gonna use this, right?
That's so random.
I don't think so.
That's so random.
How the hell?
Sorry. Webster.
It's not. It's on silent. I don't even.
All right.
I've got a bit that I need to do.
Oh, you gotta do it. Yeah.
We need to
Finishing game.
have a
He's
pre-recorded
like, just
bit.
like, I don't care,
Yeah.
you do this thing.
What was it again?
Hello. Hello and welcome to Word Up Podcast. I'm Evie,
And I'm Webster.
and today we are with the first guest of our new season. Can you introduce yourself?
My name's Joel McKerrow. I am an Australian spoken word artist.
Welcome to the podcast.
It is good to be here.
Welcome to Amsterdam.
Thank you.
How's it feel?
It feels, I'm feeling pretty exhausted after, I think it was about 26 hours total in transit. So I got here yesterday. And then, because it's like whatever ridiculous o'clock when I arrived in Melbourne, I'm like, well, I need to stay up till nighttime. And so went adventuring through the city, and which was wonderful to have that experience. But then just by the end of that was absolutely exhausted and had little sleep again. And then decided I'd go to a museum today and walk around seeing Vincent's work at the Van Gogh Museum.
Nice.
And so, you know, after all that, I'm kind of ready for a sleep. But we'll do a podcast instead of sleeping. Why not?
Yeah,
That's how we roll.
we need you awake for this one.
Okay, great. Try to do it.
So, what's your first impression of Amsterdam?
Oh, my first impression of Amsterdam. I really like it. I like that it it feels like there is a focus on aesthetics and simplicity and, and design. Like, people care about what their spaces look like,
Right.
and it feels like the city as a whole cares about what their spaces look like, which I love going into cities where that's the case, where people have obviously thought about aesthetics and design and concentrated on that in architecture and in, although there's somehow, like, I'm walking down the street and a lot of the houses are not straight.
No, I think you must be high. That's not true. No,
It
it's
was
true.
kind of freaking me out. I'm like, I can see the curving angle of that house. It's a little scary.
Yeah.
But I really like Amsterdam. I was thinking today walking, I'm like, this is a city I could live in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what brings you here?
So I'm here for a festival. So I have the lucky, it is lucky, although it's not as romanticized as people make it out to be a full-time spoken word poet who gets to travel around the world. Sounds wonderful, which it is, but it's also can be a lonely thing and can be a hard breaking of rhythms and pattern thing. And but I am here. A festival has invited me to come to festivals, one here and one in the UK. So performing tomorrow night is the opener. So I'll be opening to, I think there's a few thousand people there.
Wow.
I'm doing the spoken word opening piece with a poem of mine called Welcome Home, which is a letter to the creative artist to say, welcome home.
Nice.
That's pretty exciting. So how did you get started in spoken word?
How did I get started? I got started many years ago. I was... I'll give you a shortened version of the long story. That's probably a good thing to do. I actually got started on the border of Thailand and Burma, is where I got started really with the writing side of things. So I'd written a bit of poetry in my teenage years, but it was very cliche, very cringe factor teenage kind of poetry. But then I was on the border of Thailand and Burma. I went over to do some work there in an orphanage, place where kids came across the border out of Burma after they'd seen a lot of their family wiped out and their villages wiped out by the military over there, and had escaped across the border, and the Thai government wouldn't let them become Thai citizens or anything like that, so they couldn't get any medical or education or anything. So there's there's a strip called No Man's Land between Thailand and Burma, where there's a whole lot of villages that came up and a bunch of refugee camps and things like that. And so I went to this orphanage. I was there, and my first experience there, I kind of walked in as this mother came in who'd been trekking for a few days with her little baby boy on her back who was really sick, and she heard about this orphanage that she could go to and get medical attention, and she got there, but as she got there, she realized that her baby boy had just died on her back. And so I kind of arrived at the same time to this wailing, weeping mother. And then my first job at this place was to go, I remember walking up this little kind of sandy jungle path into this bamboo jungle, this clearing, this grave site clearing with all these bamboo crosses just stuck into the sand there, and my job with two of the orphan boys was to dig a grave for this little baby boy, and it just shattered my life. Like I'd grown up really comfortable in kind of white upper middle class Bubbleville, and had no idea about the reality of the world really. And so this is a long story to say. I needed some way to express the shattering. Like I just got angry. I got angry at Western society, that we would allow this to happen, angry at my parents to let me grow up in kind of ignorance, angry at myself, just angry. And I pulled out a pen and paper and I started writing. I remember writing there on the border in this little bamboo hut, hearing like machine gun fire in the valleys over in Burma. And the writing came out as poetry, as me just trying to get out the wrestling around inside that had been happening through this. So yeah, that's kind of where my writing began. A little while later, a friend sent me a YouTube link to Anis Mojgani. Have you heard of Anis Mojgani? He's an American performance poet. He won National Poetry Slam in the States and all that kind of stuff. He's a famous poet over there. And I just had that moment of watching like spoken word for the first time and going, oh shit, like this exists. This it moved me so much. And so I'd been college lecturing and doing a bunch of stuff. And so kind of bringing together this love that I had over that past year of writing and poetry and now like the performance aspect, I was like, this is me. Like I've found my thing. And then it took over my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's intense.
Yeah.
Quite a story.
Yeah, that's an intense story. Just to kick off the podcast with a nice light-hearted story about Burma and genocide.
That's a fascinating way to get into your craft.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
was it a case of you started writing at that point and you didn't think about performance?
Yeah. No, it definitely wasn't about performance.
More of an outlet.
Yeah, I didn't even know you could perform poetry anywhere at that point. It was just an outlet for me to express myself, I think to work through those rumbling around that anger and that injustice and that all the stuff that was coming up in me from that experience. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Would you say you have certain topics you write about?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, stemming out of that and my life since that time, that was kind of the beginnings of I suppose what I'd call the shattering of my life and worldview and understanding, and my fishbowl, I suppose you could say. I think I said to you yesterday that one of my favourite sayings in the world is a fish in a bowl doesn't know that it's wet. It's been swimming around in its little water fishbowl all of its life and has no idea about this thing called dryness. And this experience for me was like a shattering of my fishbowl. I had to confront my privileged existence in all the different ways that I am privileged as a white man, a white heterosexual married man in our world. And so that experience for me then led into a whole lot of writing as I was kind of deconstructing and challenging Western society and our media system and our consumer system that we were a part of and all that kind of stuff that naturally kind of came out in my writing. So I definitely worked through that. And then at the same time, it kind of then began to I suppose my other thing that I write on a lot, as well as the social issues in the world and my own privilege amongst that, would be kind of I think what I began to realize as I was writing my poetry and as I was doing a bunch of kind of, activist stuff and trying to use my life to better our world and things like that, I still just saw so much in the communities and the activist communities and the people that I was connected to who were trying to change the world. I still was like, in the wake of all the good stuff that they're doing, there's all these broken relationships, and it was like they didn't deal with their own shit. And so as much as they were trying to help the world, there was still their own shit got in the way. And so a lot of my topics then have become, I think, of poetry as a way for me to really self-reflect and ask myself hard questions, and a space to lament my life and challenge my inner world and bring hope to my inner world as well, to kind of hold, I call it inside my aching pain and my delicious hope, that I think each of us have aching pain and delicious hope in our lives. And it's really easy, I suppose it's really easy to go to either one of those. Like, some people go really easily to the aching pain and the woe is me and everything is fucked. And am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Yeah.
You just did.
I just did. Sorry, any children who might be listening. Like some of us really get into that kind of deep, dark, the world is screwed, poetry and creativity in general. But I think it's actually, for me, it's actually the job of the artist, the role of the artist, I think, in society and in our lives, is to hold both of those two things together, aching pain and delicious hope. Like the aching pain that laments and questions and challenges the reality of our world and how our world is structured and set up, but then also calling people to the delicious hope of what could be. In fact, the poem that I'll do maybe a bit later, it's called Do Not Despair, and it's actually all around this this idea of holding this aching pain and delicious hope together. Yeah.
So it's just holding both. It's not finding a sweet spot in between.
I don't know if there's a sweet spot in between aching pain and delicious hope. And I think sometimes it's actually right to sit in the aching pain for a lot longer, because it's too fake to go to the delicious hope. Like, if that makes sense. And I think at times then we've kind of got to drag ourselves out of the pit of aching pain through delicious hope, through inspiring things and beautiful things, and open our eyes again to see the beauty in the world. And I went to the, as I said, I went to the Van Gogh Museum at the start. I went to the Van Gogh Museum today and was walking around, and just seeing like his use of colour and paint in everything we know about Van Gogh, like rebelling against all that was happening in his interior mental world, that was bringing him into depression and things like that. It was like, I just that word rebellion just kept on coming into my head. Like, he's rebelling against the aching pain of his life through painting the most vividly coloured, beautiful things. I'm like, that's what I want to do with my poetry. Like, I want it. I do want it to question and challenge the dark. I want to paint vivid. Like, I want to paint beauty and give myself to beauty as well. So they're holding those two together, obviously, is really important for me with my poetry. Yeah,
because they do say that it's three things that allow you to get rid of the pain: is sound, breath, and movement. So writing is like journaling can be a movement, and sound is, so you're doing that with your poetry.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all these three things, right? Because you still breathe in between, I guess.
Occasionally I breathe once in a while. Once in a while, yeah.
And are there any artists that you take inspiration from? You're speaking of Van Gogh and his idea of rebelling. Or where else do you source inspiration for your poetry?
Oh, lots of different places. Recently, poetry-wise, has been Mary Oliver. Have you heard of Mary Oliver? She's an American poet. She passed away last year, maybe. So an older lady, not a spoken word poet, though she has. There's recordings and stuff of her sharing poetry, but she her poetry is just beautifully rich and really vivid around kind of observations. So her creative discipline was taking a notepad and pen every morning. She lived in a forest for most of her life, and she'd go for a walk in the forest every day and just observe something, just sit there and write about the birds in the nest or the caterpillar or the whatever it might be, and then out of that came her poetry, and so the poetry is filled with kind of animals and beauty and forests and lots of things, but always she gets to the deeper reality through the physical reality. So she's been really inspiring me over the last while, Mary Oliver. I'm sure there's lots of others as well. I've always been into kind of the Sufi poets, Rumi and Hafiz and Khalil Gibran and a bunch of those kind of poets. Really inspire my work. Probably someone who's had probably the most effect on my writing and probably on my life actually as well is there's an old Irish poet. He died a few years ago in I forget what year. I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago or something. But his name's John O'Donoghue. So he was an Irish Catholic priest, poet, philosopher. But his writing is just beautiful, stunning kind of stuff. Like, I remember picking up his book and reading it, and it was one of those moments of, I found my people. Like, I've found my tribe in his writing. Not just like his prose writing is just as much poetry as his poetry writing. So he has inspired me no end in life, absolutely.
Yeah, but he's quite amazing. This one I know.
His work? Yeah, oh great. Yeah.
I read him, I think I was 15 for the first time.
Oh wow, yeah.
And I read it and translated, not in English, and then I had to reread everything in English.
yeah.
So it also was, I relate to everything you said, so it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But you're also not just a poet, you're also a teacher.
I am a teacher, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I do a lot of, I think because I never want my poetry just to be about me, just like poetry can be so self-wankerish. Does that translate at all to you guys?
Self-masturbatory.
Yeah, self-masturbatory. I always want my poetry to be about bigger things than just myself, and my poetry career, my poetry vocation to be as well, that it's not just me trying to use poetry for my own betterment, but trying to bring about a better world, a better society, trying to inspire and future writers and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of my time is spent within schools and within sometimes in juvenile justice centres and Indigenous communities and refugee communities and stuff around Australia. In fact, when I first started doing poetry, very quickly wanted to bring it into something, and so a few friends and myself started an organisation called the Centre for Poetics and Justice. So going into places and using poetry and hip hop and rap as a way for kids who are going through hard stuff to explore their own story and share their own story and things like that. And so it doesn't happen anymore, but I'm continuing that work. So I do a lot of work normally either around identity or around social issues, or bringing the two together within schools. But it's just as rewarding as performing poetry in front of thousands of people. Like to get in and have a kid who I don't know, he's like really shy or rolls their eyes when you say you're going to do poetry, and has just a very narrow understanding, and then like it just begins to open up, and then if you get a few school days with them or whatever, and to see them by the end like screaming their poetry into the world, and that thing that we know that poetry can be, just makes it all worth it. I love it. Yeah, so I love doing stuff in schools, education stuff.
Yeah. Is there something else you do? The secret?
What else do you do?
Is there other things that I do?
Like the cape coming out?
Other things than poetry? What else do I do? I have no idea what I do I have a hobby that's not about writing.
Parenting?
parenting. That's not my
full-time hobby, yeah.
That's my full-time hobby. So I am a father of 2, a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old.
Oh, nice.
So life is very hectic and exhausting with those 2. And so I'm married, so I try to be a husband in there as well in that time. And I also, this hobby is wood carving. I really love. I picked it up maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
Nice.
Just picking up a bit of wood, and I've got some kind of palm knives and just carving and making whatever bodies, sculptures, and I just did a horse for a friend recently, and yeah, and I've never done that kind of hand work before, but I've really fallen in love with it. So when I get time, which I don't get heaps of time, being poetry career and touring and performing, and then whenever I'm home parenting, and if they're asleep, then that's when the trying to be a good husband kind of thing comes into it. Yeah. So my life is very full, right, between everything that I do, because my poetry. I also have a lot of stuff that I do with my poetry in terms of projects that I'm working on and things like that. Right. So I don't just kind of get up and perform poetry in a few places or whatever. I'm constantly like, okay, what's my next thing I'm working on? So I've just finished the first draft of a fiction book that I've been writing, a fantasy, kind of young adult fantasy-esque type thing.
Nice.
I have an album, so I've done 3 albums in the past of music and poetry combined, and got another one that I'm beginning to work on at the moment. And I have a book coming out later in the year, in November, which is like a non-fiction, not a little bit memoir-esque, but it actually begins with the story that I just told before about where poetry began for me, and kind of goes into what it looks like to have your world shattered, and then how to reweave. It's a book called Woven, how to reweave your life together. So there's always, I'm just constantly onto.
Sounds intense.
I've got lots of things that I do. One of my exciting things coming up soon is I don't even know when this is coming out, but if this comes out before my thing starts, which is September 9th, it's coming out after, so you're going to hear it in post. You won't be here before this thing starts, but and my first online course, which
cool.
Starting September 9th, so online creative writing course all around self-reflection and poetry and things like that. So I'm really excited about that. I'm bringing that together, doing all the filming and for the videos and all that kind of thing at the moment. So
we'll put the link on.
Yes, still put the link on, because I'll run it again. So Joel McKerrow education.com is where people can find out. The next one that I'll do the same one again. So the one that's happening in September is called A Clearing in the Forest, an online writing course for the cultivating of artistry and self-growth through the creative process. So it's specifically a creative process kind of course for people to begin with having nothing, having no idea what to write or what to do, and feeling quite stuck in that, trying to get them all the way through to the point where they're inviting people into their work, whatever that looks like.
Nice. But this sounds really busy.
A lot.
That's my life. My life is insane.
Do you have help with that, or do you have assistant? Do you have 5?
I wish I had an assistant. I really wish I had an assistant. I don't. No, I do it all myself. Actually, my wife does actually help. No, so I don't do it all myself.
Shout out.
Shout out to my wife who does. She did a lot of the web design for my course and things like that. Okay. So she's been helping out a bunch recently. But most of the time, I'm just organising it all, and which is kind of it's part of that, like I said before, that romanticised idea of what a full-time poetry career is, when probably, and it's the same, any artist I talk to, it's the same. It's like 70% of their full-time career is logistics and emails and invoicing and all that kind of crap that we have to do. And then there's like 2 days of actually, like 30% of actually creative time of writing, and then another bit of time of performing. And so I wish I had some assistance so that my full-time poetry career is actually writing poetry full time. That would be wonderful.
I'm just like having time to meditate and like
yeah, that's right.
reflect.
Yeah.
Well, we would love to hear one of your poems if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I can do that. There is too much pain here. Have you seen it? Or not seen it as much as felt it? Let the broken wrap around you like chain, like heavy chain, like sorrow. There is too much sorrow here. It gets under your skin and in your eyes, a dark lens, and everything seems hopeless these days. Everything seems hopeless. The little girls taken as sex slaves, a suicide behind detention center fences, a black man shot, a little boy washed up on a beach, a wife beaten, the president, his grabby hands, and how we just bluff off abuse from those who are in power, the incarceration of color, and always the starving children, and the people my government still keeps imprisoned on an island called Nauru. Sometimes I don't know what to do. Despair is an absence, and I feel useless in its blankness. And yet, friends, my daughter still makes me smile. And my son, he makes me laugh. Yet, the girl who was raped, on the day that I met her, she would not stop giggling and tickling her brother, both of them lost in a rapture deeper than I could ever know. Yet the girl with the HIV scabs all over her body on the dirty streets of Kampala, she would not stop pulling faces at me, her revelry a refusal in the face of the disease that burnt through her body. Yet the boy in Burma who had just seen his family shot, he still loved to play paper, rock and scissors, and he would beat me every time. Yet the children still chase each other daily through the bombed out buildings of the broken city. They do not realize, so they do not let the delight die. Yet they fly kites, yet they dance, yet they dream, yet the mothers still sing, and I have heard their song, and it sounds like hope, and it sounds like jubilation, and I do not understand it. Still, joy resides here where she should not be. There she thrives, more vibrant than anything. And so if these fractured friends, if they may still smile, then I too must appreciate the way that the day always begins with color, the way the flowers grow, the way the words taste, the way the afternoon sun warms my skin, the way she lets me in. I too must hold hands with delight, kiss the extravagance, to revel in this existence, to not despair, to see that beauty, she is everywhere, folded deep into every dark thing. So may our lives be a chasing of the beautiful, not a taking of the light into the darkness, but recognizing she already resides there. Let us chase the light and find the light and run the light and taste the light, become the light and dance the light, even in the night when the sun is cast upon a heavy moon. Friends, do not despair. For this beauty, this light, this joy, this hope, they are everywhere, folded deep into every dark thing. Woo! Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you very much for sharing.
Yeah, no worries. My pleasure.
Powerful and emotional.
I'm goosebumpy.
Yeah.
So tell us about your process. How did you get to this?
That's a good question. My process for this poem, or my poetry in general, is trying to, I think, come at both the what I'd call probably the abstract and the concrete, and to bring both together. And so if every poem has, every piece of writing really, but poetry is kind of about the deep things and the big things and the hard things. It's about social injustice, and it's about pain and suffering and joy and extravagance and all that kind of stuff. But they're very abstract things. Like, how do you talk about hope? How do you talk about love or suffering or loss or whatever it is? And so what I'm always trying to do with my creative process is to bring that abstract concept, that thematic idea, into relationship with, into dialogue with story and imagery. And so for me, like with that poem that I just did, is reflecting on the pain, the aching pain and delicious hope, like we were talking about before, of the world, but kind of going through and remembering these experiences that I've had in my life, where in the midst of where you would expect darkness to be, and there to be no hope, seeing like the hope in these kids playing, and in the joy in them, and the power in these mamas singing beautiful songs, and like all these experiences that I've had throughout the world. And so to link kind of abstract idea with the story, with some of the stories from my life, I think that's what I'm always trying to do with my poetry. And so my kind of creative process, I either come at it from either of those angles. Like, I'll start in the abstract and the conceptual with a thought, with an idea, something that I want to write about, and then kind of begin to work from there. What's the from that meta thing, what's the metaphor that could play with it, that could engage with it? What's either metaphor or story or imagery in any kind of sense? And so I'll either go from the abstract into the concrete in that way, and connect that abstract concept to normally using my five senses. I often use my five senses a lot. Like, if I could taste if I could taste hope, what does hope taste like for me? Or if I could, that kind of idea.
What really struck me was how visual that piece was for me. I was seeing everything you were speaking about, because it's so vivid and colorful in a sense. I felt like I was there, going through the journey that you're speaking of in that moment. So I think that really worked.
Sweet. So I kind of take those two things, I bring them together. But a big part of my process is allowing myself to write crap. So one of the things I always tell my students, the secret to writing really good poetry, is stop trying to write really good poetry, because we just get too quickly into editing brain, and our creative flow gets stifled. Like we're up here critiquing our work before we even written it, before we even know what it's meant to be. We're questioning what we're doing. And so the only way to write good poetry is to write tons and tons of shit poetry. So verbal diarrhea, to write and then take that and craft that into the pieces that I then get to perform to thousands of people. But to start with, it's just being willing. So I show up every day. My creative practice is I write a poem every day, and most of that poetry's crap. But that's the point. Like, there's no way that I can get to the good stuff if I'm not willing just to sit there and write it out. And I often will start with flow of conscious, so pen to paper and not allowing my pen to stop moving, and then going in and finding the best stuff within that to take and craft into the actual final piece.
Are there any things in normal life that you think contribute to you writing well or better, or more to your core in a sense?
In my normal life, I was thinking about this the other day actually, because I realized, like, when I do have time for writing, and when I have a day that's like a writing day, I will I've worked out that I like carve space for me to do my creativity without even kind of realizing it. Like, so it's my job to take the kids to school and childcare. So I drop them at school and childcare, and then I come home and I go straight into the kitchen, and it's just like making a cup of tea, which I thought was just making a cup of tea, but it's actually something that is bringing me into being present into the moment. Like, it's this slowing myself down, and then I take that tea to I have an old antique desk that I took and restored myself and stuff, and so that's where I do a bunch of my writing from. And so just even like opening that desk up and sitting there with my tea, it's like a ritual in some sense. Like it gives me the space to then create out of. So I think that really helps, like having this carved set aside space and carved set aside time as well, is a really helpful thing, just so that and with no social media and all that kind of stuff, so that I'm present. Because I think the work of any writer who wants to make it, who wants to actually write stuff, like the writer's job is to show up, to sit down and to not get up until it's done, like to just go at it and have that discipline and practice. So I think the more ritual, the pattern kind of habitual stuff that I can bring in my ordinary life, the better my writing then comes out of it. Yeah.
So no pictures of kittens.
No pictures of kittens.
You don't sacrifice a chicken before you ride or anything like that. No,
surprisingly not. Or a kangaroo. I'm
That's
from Australia.
strange.
Yeah. No sacrificial kangaroos.
Oh, okay, good to know. No animals were injured.
No. Although this is so freaking Aussie. There was a kookaburra stuck in our house the other day. Do you ever know what a kookaburra is?
I was going to ask.
I don't know what
I've heard the word.
is.
I've heard the word too.
It's a very Australian bird. It's like a...
Oh, it's a bird, okay.
Yeah. But big, like massive bird. It's a bird that laughs. Like it's
call, many birds laugh.
Its call is very distinctively laughter. It really sounds like it's laughing. So there was this massive kookaburra stuck in our house the other day.
And she was laughing at you?
No, it wasn't laughing, but it was... My 3-year-old was freaked out by it. Totally.
It's probably bigger than...
It's bigger than her, yeah. But I had to do the whole protective dad thing, so I had to be like courageous and bold.
Oh, yeah. That's the cape. That's where the cape comes in.
I'm like shitting myself as well. I remember a bird came into our house a few years ago before kids, and I was like petrified to get my wife to get it out because I was too scared to get out myself. But now I had to be the protective dad. Now I've...
Yeah. But wait, you're a big burly man.
I'm a big burly man. Who would think that it was one of those black crows? That's what had come in.
Those steely eyes.
Yeah. Like, you're just gonna bite my face off.
Yeah.
Wow.
But and the kookaburra has the same kind of savage, like real strong beak that you're
really?
like, if that thing got near me.
Are they the ones with the big
and I got it out.
three massive toes? No, I'm thinking of something else. That's really dangerous in Australia.
I mean,
with 3 massive toes.
Yeah, it's got like 3 claw type.
Oh yeah.
It's a bird.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway,
it's a bird.
I'll find it.
There is a lot of dangerous things in Australia.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's the one. It's called an emu.
An emu.
They're scary.
They're just massive.
Yeah.
They're like but you're never going to see emus like.
Oh really? Just roaming around.
No.
Okay, cool.
They'll be out in the bush, out in.
Oh, okay, good.
Outback Australia.
I'm glad. I had a trip planned. I was very worried.
Right. No emus or kangaroos jumping down Main Street of Melbourne, unfortunately.
Ah, that's a shame.
Yeah. You never know, maybe. I mean... okay, so National Geographic. Here we are. From poetry to...
Flora and fauna of Australia, wildlife of Australia.
It's great, it's good to know. I mean, now we know another word. And another animal.
Kookaburra, yeah.
I wanted to know about your process before going on stage. How much do you perform after you've written a piece? Is it something you practice in the mirror, or is it something that comes out kind of naturally because you're practicing it in your head? How does that work?
I make sure I do it out loud a lot. So my memorizing technique, I memorize a lot of my poetry, and that is out loud, just grabbing the first verse, stanza, chunk, whatever, and going over it again and again and again and again, and then the next and the next and the next, and then memorizing how they join together. So I'm constantly saying my poetry out loud, and that helps me as well to find the rhythm that I want to bring to it, and to find the different dynamics, like the raising in voice and dropping voice and pace and tone and tonal changes, all that kind of stuff. And so I do a lot of work, I think, taking it from the page to then performing it, but it really is all out loud again and again and again and again. I think that's the only way that I've found to do it, to work out what it can be. And then as I get on stage with it, I think probably just a big part of it for me is wanting to give people an experience of the poem. So obviously in performance poetry, I always say, don't tell me your poem, show me your poem. But I want to do more than just show as well. Like I want to give people an experience. I want them to feel the heart of it, the joy of it, the anger of it, the whatever it's about, the sadness of it. And so that for me means I need to be willing to go to that place as well. And so I'm constantly trying to, even though a piece that I might have performed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times before, trying when I get up on stage to be as present as I can to that piece, just like I was doing it that first time, to share it with as much emotional conviction and authenticity as I can. Before I jump up and perform, I'm really focusing on trying to be present and embody that poem as I get up there.
Yeah, it sounds very heavy also, because you go into that through empathy also, like to connect to the people, to the audience.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It is emotionally heavy to be a performance poet, I think.
Yeah.
If you, performance poetry can just be entertainment and fun and that kind of thing, of course, but kind of being willing to go there is part of the way that I do my poetry. And so it's freaking exhausting. Like after doing a set and giving my whole self to that, I can feel very tired.
How do you refill yourself? How do you recuperate?
Things like the wood carving and that kind of stuff.
Tactile experience more.
Yeah. And just... I'm just lying down, listening to music and
disconnecting, I guess.
Disconnecting, I think disconnecting from life and the world, which is hard because often I'll get home and then it's my turn with the kids, so that's not as
well, it switches it up, right?
It does switch it up. Yeah, that's right. It might be a classic reinvigorating, but sitting there and building Lego, it can just be as
very soothing.
Yeah,
I mean.
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I would like that.
Yeah.
Lego, I mean.
Yeah.
So what's next for you in the future?
What is next for me in the future? As I said, I've got a few things, like there's a bunch of stuff that I'm constantly doing, and so a few things coming out, like the online course coming out in September, my book, so it's called Woven, A Spirituality for the Dissatisfied, coming out in November, being published in Australia in November. And then I think the start of next year I'll work on this new album and try to bring that together. There's an American musician that is keen to do some stuff, so I might do it in collaboration with him, which would be really great. And so I think those three kind of things are going to take me well into next year. And then who knows? We'll see after that. I'm sure I'll get inspired with my next idea and next project. I'm excited to take my fiction book, and I've just begun the editing process of that.
Oh, cool.
Which, as we know, is just as I'm loving editing more than I am initial writing these days, which is really weird because I used to hate editing.
Right.
But now I love it. I love the movement of taking the work that all that shit crap poetry that I've written or fiction book or whatever that I've written and working out the most beautifully articulate and economic way that I can phrase this, that someone would read it and be just as moved by the sentence, by the way that I've phrased and structured this sentence as the content itself. Those lines that you read something and you're like, oh. Yeah, so I love doing that. I really love it. So I'm really enjoying working on that kind of to then hopefully find a publisher for that fiction book at some point. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and then I'll keep on touring and all the stuff that I'm doing. Yeah.
And for our listeners who are listening, where can they find you on social media?
Yeah. So, well, you can find my website at joelmckerrow.com. So JoelMckerrow.com. And then all my Instagram and Facebook and stuff they're the two main kind of things that I use on social media. Instagram a lot is just Joel McKerrow Poet on Instagram or Joel McKerrow on Facebook. The other thing that I do that I totally didn't even mention, I'm on a podcast, is I do my own podcast as well. So not my own, me and filmmaker, photographer in the States, an incredible woman named Joy Prouty we just finished our first season of our podcast. It's called The Deep Place on Creativity and Spirituality. And so beginning to do interviews and stuff like this one for my second season coming up at some point at the end of the year. So you can look up The Deep Place on creativity and spirituality if you listen to podcasts. I have a listen to stuff as well. And I've got all the videos on YouTube and all the normal kind of stuff. So just look up Joel McKerrow. There's only one other Joel McKerrow, and I think he's from the UK and definitely not a poet.
Handy.
So, yeah. So you'll find me pretty quickly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for being here.
My absolute privilege.
And we're looking forward to everything you have to bring out also to the world.
Thank you. Yeah.
And we'll share all the links.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Thank you very much.
No
Thank
worries.
you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Joel. And as usual, you can find us on www.worduppodcast.com, where you will find our past episodes with guests from season 1, as well as our latest guests in season 2. You'll also be able to find our social media and information that our guests have talked about in each episode. Thank you.
Doei.
Was that okay?
That's great.
Well, you're really good to interview because you have a lot to say. So this is actually
we're
quite
like just
easy.
like hanging out.
I do tend to have a lot to say.
Because I'd have a question, then you go into, I was like, never mind.
Yeah, I'm like, I still have a few questions.